September 19, 1940, Warsaw, Poland. Witold Pilecki stands on a crowded street corner, watching German soldiers conduct a łapanka, a street roundup. The Nazis are grabbing random civilians, loading them onto trucks, sending them to labor camps or prisons. Most Poles hide when they hear the soldiers coming. Pilecki walks directly toward them. He's 39 years old, a cavalry officer, a husband and father of two, and he's about to do something that historians will later call the most courageous act of World War II. Pilecki is volunteering to be arrested, volunteering to be sent to Auschwitz, the Nazi concentration camp that's already developing a reputation for unimaginable brutality. His mission: infiltrate the camp, organize resistance from within, gather intelligence about what's really happening there, and get that information to the Allies. Most people would do anything to avoid Auschwitz. Pilecki is walking straight into it. And here's what makes his story even more incredible. He'll succeed. For 2.5 years, Pilecki will survive in Auschwitz, a place designed to break and kill prisoners in weeks. He'll build a network of over 1,000 resistance members inside the camp. He'll smuggle out reports that give the world its first comprehensive picture of the Holocaust. And in 1943, he'll escape. But the world won't believe his reports. The Allies will dismiss them as exaggerated propaganda. And after the war, when Communist Poland takes over, Pilecki will be arrested, tortured, and executed as a spy. His story will be buried for 50 years. This is the story of Witold Pilecki, the only man to voluntarily enter Auschwitz, the resistance fighter who told the world about the Holocaust, and the hero whose own country tried to erase him from history. Section 1. The volunteer. To understand why Witold Pilecki volunteered for Auschwitz, you need to understand who he was before the war. And that story begins in Poland's eastern borderlands, where a young cavalry officer learns the meaning of duty. Before the war, Witold Pilecki was born on May 13, 1901, in Oleniec, Russia, remote outpost in Karelia, where his family had been exiled for participating in Polish uprisings against Russian rule. His family was Polish nobility, stripped of their lands and sent to the frozen north as punishment. Growing up in exile shaped Pilecki. He learned that Poland's freedom was worth fighting for. That sacrifice meant something. That duty mattered more than comfort. When Poland regained independence in 1918, Pilecki was 17. He immediately joined the newly formed Polish army and fought in the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921, including the pivotal Battle of Warsaw that saved Poland from Soviet conquest. After the war, Pilecki settled in Lida, now in Belarus, with his wife Maria, a schoolteacher. They had 2 children, Andrei and Zofia. Pilecki ran the family estate, growing clover seeds, organizing the local volunteer fire brigade, and leading a cavalry training unit. He painted. He wrote poetry. He was, by all accounts, living a quiet, peaceful life. And then, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The secret Polish army Pilecki immediately mobilized. He commanded a cavalry unit that fought German forces during the September campaign. But Poland was caught between 2 enemies. Germany invaded from the west, the Soviet Union from the east. Within weeks, Poland was defeated and occupied. Most Polish soldiers surrendered or fled. Pilecki made his way to Warsaw and did something different. He helped found the secret Polish army, Tajna Armia Polska, or TAP, one of the first resistance organizations in occupied Poland. TAP's mission was to gather intelligence, conduct sabotage operations, and prepare for an eventual Polish uprising against the occupiers. But by mid-1940, the resistance was hearing disturbing reports about a new German concentration camp at Auschwitz, a town the Germans renamed. Auschwitz. Prisoners were being sent there by the thousands. Almost none were being released. And the few who did escape brought horrifying stories of systematic torture, mass executions, and medical experiments. The Polish resistance knew Auschwitz was important. They knew the Germans were up to something terrible there. But they didn't know the details. They didn't have solid intelligence. They didn't have anyone on the inside. That's when Pilecki's commander, Major Jan Wawadarkic, made a proposal. The mission: At a TAP meeting in August 1940, Wawada Kijil looked at his officers and said, "We need someone to infiltrate Auschwitz, to organize resistance inside, to gather intelligence, to prepare for a possible uprising." It wasn't an order. It was an invitation to volunteer. Pilecki understood immediately what this meant. Auschwitz was a death sentence. Average prisoner survival was estimated at 6 to 8 weeks. Torture was routine. Executions were daily. And if the Germans discovered you were a resistance fighter, you'd be killed slowly, publicly, as an example. Most men would have refused. Pilecki raised his hand. His reasoning was simple. Someone has to do it. If not me, then who? TAP provided Pilecki with false identity documents. He would enter Auschwitz as Tomasz Serafowski, a common name, a tanner by trade, with no military background. Just another Polish civilian. On September 19, 1940, Pilecki went to the apartment of his sister-in-law Eleonora Ostrowska in the Kolobors district of Warsaw. He knew the Germans were conducting a Łapanka on that street that day. He could have hidden in a secret compartment in the apartment. Instead, he walked outside. German soldiers spotted him immediately. They grabbed him along with about 2,000 other Polish civilians. For 2 days, Pilecki was held in the Light Horse Guards barracks, where prisoners were beaten with rubber truncheons to soften them up before transport. On the night of September 21st to 22nd, 1940, Pilecki was loaded onto a cattle car with hundreds of other prisoners and shipped to Auschwitz. He was given prisoner number 4859. Mission begins. Section 2. Inside Hell. The moment Pilecki arrived at Auschwitz, he understood that this was far worse than anyone had imagined. The first days Pilecki later wrote about his arrival. We had our heads and bodies shaved. It was here that I had my first 2 teeth knocked out, the reason being that I was carrying my registration number in my hand instead of carrying it in my teeth. I got hit in the jaw with a heavy rod. The brutality was immediate, systematic, and designed to break prisoners psychologically before killing them physically. Every morning, prisoners were forced to stand for hours in the roll call square, often in sub-zero temperatures, while guards counted and recounted them. Anyone who moved was beaten or shot. Prisoners who had died during the night were stacked in piles next to the living. Work assignments were designed to be fatal. Prisoners hauled heavy stones at a run from one location to another, for no purpose except to exhaust them. Guards would order them to run faster, then shoot anyone who fell behind. It was called sport, the SS guards' favorite entertainment. Food was a starvation diet, watery soup, a small piece of bread. Prisoners lost weight rapidly, 30, 40, 50 pounds in a matter of weeks. Their bodies began to consume themselves. Disease was rampant. Typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. The camp had a hospital, but it was less a place of healing and more a place where the weakest prisoners were sent to die out of sight. And then there were the random executions. Guards would shoot prisoners for looking at them wrong, for working too slowly, for no reason at all. Pilecki calculated that the average prisoner survived about 6 weeks. Some died in days. Very few lasted months. He needed to survive long enough to accomplish his mission. Building the network, despite the horror around him, Pilecki began working immediately. His mission had 3 parts. Organize a resistance network inside the camp, gather intelligence about camp operations, smuggle reports to the Polish underground. For the first part, Pilecki had to identify which prisoners could be trusted. He couldn't risk approaching the wrong person. An informant could get him killed. So Pilecki watched. He observed. He looked for men who still had fight in their eyes. Men who helped others even when it meant risking punishment. Men who whispered defiance when the guards weren't listening. Slowly, carefully, Pilecki began recruiting. He'd approach a prisoner and whisper a few words. "We're organizing. Are you with us?" Most said yes. By late 1940, Pilecki had recruited about 100 men. They called their organization the Union of Military Organizations, Związek Organizacji Wojskowych, or ZOW. Those members came from every section of the camp. They had prisoners working in the kitchen, the hospital, the workshops, the warehouses. They created a communication system using coded messages and signals. And critically, they identified prisoners who were about to be released or who had access to the outside civilian workers, sympathetic guards, anyone who could carry messages. The reports Pilecki's intelligence gathering was meticulous. He documented everything: the layout of the camp, guard towers, barbed wire, buildings, warehouses, the daily routine, roll calls, work assignments, executions, the number of prisoners arriving and dying, the methods of execution: shooting, hanging, beatings, starvation, medical experiments, the identities of the worst guards and SS officers. In October 1940, just 1 month after arriving, Pilecki sent out his first report. A young Polish officer named Alexander Wielopolski had memorized the entire report. Pilecki couldn't risk writing it down and delivered it orally to the resistance command in Warsaw after his release. The report detailed the systematic violations of human rights at Auschwitz. It described the torture, the mass executions, the starvation. It provided the layout of the camp and suggested possible sites for weapons and ammunition storage. Most shockingly, the report ended with a request that stunned the resistance command. Pilecki asked the Allies to bomb Auschwitz. The prisoners begged the Polish government, for the love of God, to bombard these warehouses. Should the prisoners die in the attack, it would be a relief given the conditions. Pilecki wasn't exaggerating. He'd asked other prisoners, and most agreed. Being killed instantly by a bomb would be mercy compared to what the SS was doing to them. The transformation of Auschwitz. Over the next 2 years, Pilecki watched Auschwitz transform from a brutal concentration camp into something far worse, an industrial death factory. In early 1942, the Nazis began constructing Auschwitz. 2 Birkenau massive expansions specifically designed for the mass murder of Jews, gas chambers disguised as showers, crematoria capable of burning thousands of bodies per day, railroad tracks running directly into the camp. Pilecki witnessed the arrival of the first transports of Jewish families. He watched as they were selected, the young and healthy sent to the labor camp, the old, sick, and children sent directly to the gas chambers. He documented everything: the number of transports, the estimated number of deaths, the methods of killing, the disposal of bodies. Between October 1940 and March 1943, Zhao successfully smuggled out dozens of reports. They were forwarded from Warsaw to the Polish government in exile in London, and from there to the British and American governments. Pilecki's reports were among the first comprehensive accounts of the Holocaust to reach the Allies. The cost of gathering this intelligence came at tremendous personal cost. Pilecki worked brutal labor assignments, hauling stones, digging ditches, constructing buildings, often while injured or sick. He was beaten regularly. He watched friends die. He lived with the constant knowledge that any day could be his last. In his later writings, Pilecki described the psychological toll. "I have been through hell. What I went through can never be described in words." He also described the moral horror of witnessing genocide and being unable to stop it. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was watching innocent people, families, children being led to the gas chambers and knowing there was nothing I could do. By late 1942, Zhao had grown to over 1,000 members. They had successfully organized multiple work details, infiltrated key positions in the camp administration, and maintained a functioning intelligence network for over 2 years. But the Gestapo was closing in. Section 3. The escape. By early 1943, the situation inside Auschwitz had become untenable. The Gestapo had identified and executed several Zhao members. The network was compromised, and Pilecki realized that if he stayed much longer, he'd be discovered, tortured, and killed, taking all his intelligence about the camp with him. He made a decision. He had to escape, planning the impossible. Escaping from Auschwitz was considered impossible. The camp was surrounded by multiple layers of barbed wire fences, some electrified with enough voltage to kill instantly. Guard towers manned by SS soldiers with machine guns covered every approach. Searchlights swept the grounds at night. German Shepherd attack dogs patrolled the perimeter. And there was the decimation rule. For every prisoner who escaped, The SS would execute 10 other prisoners from his barracks as collective punishment. This policy made most prisoners unwilling to attempt escape. They didn't want their friends' deaths on their conscience. But Pilecki's situation was different. He wasn't just another prisoner trying to save himself. He was carrying intelligence that could potentially save thousands. His duty was clear. Pilecki managed to get himself reassigned to a work detail at a bakery about 2 miles outside the main camp. Security there was lighter, only a few guards, and they were often distracted. He recruited 2 other prisoners for the escape, Jan Redzig and Edward Cieślski, both trusted ZOW members. The plan was simple, but required perfect timing. They would overpower a guard, cut the phone and alarm lines, and use a duplicate key, which Pilecki had somehow acquired. He never explained how, to unlock the bakery's main door. Then they'd run. April 26th to 27th, 1943. On the night of April 26th, 1943, everything came together. The 3 men were working the night shift at the bakery. Around midnight, they made their move. Redzig distracted the guard while Pilecki and Cieślski cut the phone lines. Then Cieślski overpowered the guard, not killing him, as they didn't want to trigger an immediate manhunt. Pilecki used the duplicate key to unlock the door. The 3 men slipped out into the darkness. Behind them, they heard shouts, then gunfire. Shots were fired behind us, Pilecki later wrote. How fast we were running, it is hard to describe. We were tearing the air into rags by quick movements of our hands. They ran through fields, jumped ditches, crawled through underbrush. German patrols were behind them, but in the darkness, tracking was difficult. 100 kilometers on foot over the next week, the 3 escapees traveled over 100 kilometers on foot, moving mostly at night, hiding during the day. They were still wearing their prisoner uniforms, striped shirts and pants that would immediately identify them as escapees if they were spotted. They had no food except what they could steal from fields. They had no maps, but Poles in the countryside helped them. Farmers who saw them would leave food outside their barns. Villages would allow them to hide in basements or storage sheds for a few hours. No one turned them in. After several days, they reached Bochnia, a town with an active resistance cell. There, Pilecki asked to contact the local Home Army command. The contact was arranged, and when Pilecki met the Home Army deputy commander, he received a shock. The deputy commander was the real Tomasz Serafivski, the man whose identity documents Pilecki had been using for the past 2.5 years. The real Serafivski was stunned. You're the man who's been using my name? In Auschwitz? Pilecki explained the situation. Serafivski, understanding immediately, gave Pilecki civilian clothes and helped him continue his journey to Warsaw. Witold Pilecki had spent 947 days inside Auschwitz, where the average prisoner lifespan was 42 days. He was alive, he was free, and he had intelligence that the world needed to hear. Section 4. The World Doesn't Listen. Pilecki arrived in Warsaw in early May 1943, expecting a hero's welcome. Instead, he found bureaucratic indifference and disbelief. A comprehensive report. The first thing Pilecki did was compile his comprehensive final report, known as Witold's Report, or report was over 100 pages in its final form. It detailed the complete layout of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the gas chambers and crematoria, the selection process for incoming Jewish transports, the estimated death toll, hundreds of thousands, the medical experiments conducted by SS doctors, the conditions of slave labor, the resistance network he'd built, a renewed appeal for Allied intervention. Pilecki submitted the report to Home Army headquarters. He requested a meeting with the commanding officers to present his findings, and to argue for a military operation to liberate the camp. But the Home Army commander who'd originally authorized Pilecki's mission had been arrested by the Gestapo. The new leadership didn't know Pilecki, they didn't know about his mission, and they didn't believe his report. It's exaggerated propaganda. When Pilecki met with Home Army officers, he was met with skepticism. These numbers can't be real, one officer said. Hundreds of thousands dead? Gas chambers? This sounds like propaganda, Pilecki tried to explain. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I documented everything. The problem, another officer replied, is that your story is too extreme. The Allies already don't fully believe our reports about German atrocities. If we send them something this dramatic, they'll dismiss everything we send them as unreliable. Pilecki's request for a military operation to liberate Auschwitz was flatly denied. The Home Army didn't have the resources, the Allies weren't interested. And strategically, there were higher priorities. Pilecki was devastated. He'd survived Auschwitz. He'd organized resistance inside. He'd gathered comprehensive intelligence. He'd escaped to deliver his message. And nobody would listen. The Allies knew, but here's the tragic truth. The Allies did know. Pilecki's reports, along with others, had reached London and Washington. British intelligence received detailed information about Auschwitz as early as 1941. American intelligence received similar reports in 1942. The Polish government in exile repeatedly pleaded with the British and Americans to take action. But the Allies didn't believe the scale of the Holocaust was as bad as reported. Or they believed it but decided that winning the war through military victory was the only viable strategy. Bombing Auschwitz, they argued, would divert resources from the main effort. Historian David Cesarani later wrote, "The Allies had the information. They chose not to act on it." That's the tragedy. Pilecki, sitting in Warsaw in mid-1943, realized that his mission, everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd witnessed, had failed to achieve its primary goal, stopping the genocide. But he didn't quit. The Warsaw Uprising in August 1944. The Home Army launched the Warsaw Uprising, a desperate attempt to liberate the Polish capital before Soviet forces arrived and installed a communist government. Pilecki volunteered to fight. Against orders. He was supposed to remain in a command position due to his intelligence value. He joined a frontline unit as a common soldier. He fought for 63 days as Warsaw burned. The uprising ultimately failed. German forces systematically destroyed the city, killing over 200,000 civilians and insurgents. Pilecki was captured and sent to a German POW camp at Murnau. He survived there until April 1945, when American forces liberated the camp. Most men would have gone home at this point. The war was ending. Germany was defeated. It was time to rebuild. Pilecki didn't go home. He went back to work. Section 5. Betrayal and execution after liberation. Pilecki joined the Polish, the Second Corps in Italy. He continued working in intelligence, now gathering information about the communist takeover of Poland. Because while Germany had been defeated, Poland wasn't free. The Soviet Union was installing a communist puppet government. The Home Army was being hunted and destroyed. And anyone associated with the London-based Polish government in exile was marked for arrest. In 1945, Pilecki wrote the definitive version of his Auschwitz report over 100 pages, documenting everything he'd witnessed. He titled it The Auschwitz Volunteer, Beyond Bravery. And then, in late 1945, Pilecki made a decision that would cost him his life. He volunteered to return to Poland as a spy for the government in exile. Back to Poland. Pilecki went back to Poland undercover in 1945. His mission was to gather intelligence on the communists, take over and send reports to the government in exile in London. He documented how the communists were falsifying elections, arresting former Home Army members, and systematically destroying any opposition to Soviet control. For over a year, Pilecki operated successfully. He sent dozens of reports. He identified communist agents. He helped other resistance members escape. But in May 1947, the communist secret police arrested him. The show trial. The charges against Pilecki were absurd. Espionage for the West, attempting to overthrow the Polish state, maintaining illegal contact with foreign governments, and most bizarrely organizing the deaths of Soviet soldiers. The trial was a sham. The outcome was predetermined. Pilecki was tortured during interrogation, beaten, sleep-deprived, threatened. The communists wanted him to confess, to name other resistance members, to discredit the Home Army. Pilecki refused to cooperate. Even under torture, he didn't break. Several Auschwitz survivors tried to testify on Pilecki's behalf, arguing that he was a national hero who deserved recognition, not execution. Their testimony was ignored. On May 15, 1948, Pilecki was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. May 25, 1948, at 9:30 p.m. on May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki was led to an execution room in Mokotów prison in Warsaw. He was 47 years old. His last words were reportedly, "I've tried to live my life so that in my final hour I would be happy rather than fearful. I'll just pray for all of you." He was shot once in the back of the head. His body was dumped in a mass grave. His family wasn't told where. The communist government ordered all records of Pilecki's wartime service destroyed or classified. His name was erased from Polish history books. His family was harassed and threatened into silence. For over 40 years, Witold Pilecki's story was buried by the government he'd fought to save. The truth emerges only after the fall of communism in 1989 did Pilecki's story begin to resurface. Polish historians gained access to previously classified archives. Pilecki's report was published for the first time in 2000. Survivors began speaking openly about man who'd organized resistance inside Auschwitz. In 1995, Pilecki was posthumously promoted to the rank of colonel. In 2006, he was awarded Poland's highest military decoration, the Order of the White Eagle. In 2013, Polish prosecutors officially declared his 1948 trial null and void, clearing his name completely. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from those who'd survived Auschwitz because of his network. One survivor, Joseph Garliski, wrote, Witold Pilecki's contribution to bringing the story of Auschwitz to the world cannot be overstated. He was the first. He was the most comprehensive, and he paid the ultimate price. Poland's chief rabbi, Michael Shudrick, wrote in 2012, "When God created the human being, God had in mind that we should all be like Captain Witold Pilecki, of blessed memory." Historian Norman Davies concluded, "If there was an allied hero who deserved to be remembered and celebrated, this was a person with few peers,